it is a temporary roadblock, right? A lot of very successful business people have failed at business. Someone said, you want to start a business as soon as possible and get that first failure out of your way because, and this is entirely true, I believe it in work, I believe it in life, right? How you learn is you fail at something, right? And you fail horribly. And you see everything that you would have done differently. And then you do it again and you do it differently.
Welcome to the Jeff Sutherlin Show. Let's grow today as we learn from decades of real estate and leadership experience.
We want you to know that when you log into this show, you're going to get authentic conversation. We're going to give it to you straight, and it's going to be real.
Hey everybody, Jeff Sutherlin here with my business partner Chase Waldren. We're on the Jeff Sutherlin Show. We have an attorney in the house today. This is the first time we've had a lawyer, and this guy's a great lawyer. In fact, I met him at a function recently at a mixer at Old Republic Title in the Scottsdale area, and I was overhearing him, kind of eavesdropping, I must admit, and I was impressed. I was like, I got to go talk to this guy. So I wanted to welcome Stuart Rodgers to the show today, and Stuart has a litany of experience behind him. I just want to list a few of the things that he does. This isn't the all exhaustive list, but this is like kind of like the who's who of attorneys. So he's actually a managing partner of Knock, Rodgers, Hilkert, and Santilli. And he just made that move a couple months ago, a managing partner. And he practices in several areas. Chapter 7 and 11, bankruptcy, breach of contract litigation, creditors' rights, civil litigation, collections, contracts, deficiency actions, landlords' rights, tax liens, receiverships, partitions. Wow. Certified bankruptcy specialist. So that's Stuart for you. There's a lot more to him, obviously. That's his work life, but we're going to get into his whole life today. So Stuart, welcome to the show. Let us know a little bit about your journey and how you got to this place.
Well, first of all, I'm honored. It was great talking to you a few months ago. I'm delighted to be here, and so thank you. As we were saying before the show, I think you made your first mistake having a lawyer on the show. Once you get one, sometimes then like 5, 10, 15 show up. So be careful. How I got here. I'll give you the 2-minute summary here. I'm from Washington State. I grew up in southeastern Washington. I grew up in a town that exists because of the Manhattan Project. The Hanford nuclear site is where I grew up, and so I was surrounded by a bunch of literally nuclear scientists and chemists and physicists and stuff like that. And so when I started out, I was going to go into engineering because that's just what I was surrounded with. In high school, I'd worked at an engineering firm, had some cool experiences there. To college, I had gotten a scholarship through International Science and Engineering Fair that took me down to Arizona. Went to Tucson, started in engineering there. I am probably way more overtly social than most engineers. And so I discovered pretty early on that I think my demeanor was different than most engineers. And so I kind of switched disciplines. I transferred to the University of Virginia. I did economics and government there. Missed the Southwest. I actually really love it down here. So as soon as I graduated from Virginia, I came back to Arizona. I did a master's and PhD program and then law school. I Van Wildered it. I was in college for 10 years, 4 degrees. And then when I graduated, I said, well, I have a lot of debt now. I got to work. I graduated in 2007, which I'm sure all your listeners know was the absolute worst time to graduate and go into the legal profession, sent out letters in about after I graduated, but before I got admitted to the bar. That's when the market collapsed, and every law firm that had expressed any interest in meeting with me rescinded. And so I worked at a little law firm up in Bullhead City, and then I transferred to a law firm down here in Phoenix. I was doing family and criminal, which was interesting. I had lots of trial work. Wasn't really what I wanted to get into. I was always more of a attracted to business. So when I had an opportunity after doing a trial with an attorney that was at a firm that had 5 or 6 partners, where he was family law, but his partners mostly did civil litigation, he had set me up with an interview. They were set to hire me. Then their firm collapsed. And fortunately, one of the partners at that firm knew a firm that was hiring because they were way overworked. They happened to be in bankruptcy. Bankruptcy was exploding at the time. There was a reform in '05 called BAP-CIPA, which revamped the bankruptcy code. It got rid of the ability for people to be able to discharge student loans. So in '05, there was a huge rush, right? And everyone figured that was the end of bankruptcies for a decade because everybody filed and they wouldn't be able to file again for 8 years and get a discharge. So everyone was expecting the bankruptcy market to be low. Then the Great Recession happened. Bankruptcy went up to a level that was like 4 or 5 times what it was in '05. And you had not only people that had filed before filing, but you had people that never in their wildest dreams thought they would be filing bankruptcy. And you had a massive collapse in the business industry, whole entire sectors, construction, certainly restaurant, retail, commercial landlords were really hurting. A lot of businesses had variable interest rate loans, and they weren't able to refi after the crash into a fixed loan. And that pretty much just did everyone in. So it was, how do I put this? A bad time for America. It was a good time for the insolvency business. And I was fortunate enough to get hired on at that firm. And I was working, no joke, 100 hours a week, just because the volume was so high. And I know this is a long answer. I said 2 minutes, but we're already way past that. But that brought me to the firm that I'm at now. I've been there 17 years, and certainly we can talk more about all of that. But that was the prelude to how I got where I did. I never in a million years would have set out to be bankruptcy attorney. I didn't know anything about bankruptcy. It was a blip on my radar. And you know what? And we'll get into it. What I loved about it and what I found out is it takes you into everything. It takes you into real estate law. It takes you into personal injury law. It takes you into employment law. It takes you into everything. Because when people file bankruptcy, we inherit their claims. And so it lets me touch almost every area of law that I would want to. And if I don't want to, we hire special counsel. And then I just farm it out to them.
So here's what's interesting about this. First of all, good decision on U of A, right? I'm glad you made that decision.
Bear down.
Bear down. Yeah, great decision to start off with. So the other thing, I didn't realize the state of Washington had any connection with the Manhattan Project. That is interesting. So how'd that connection happen real quick?
Sure. Have you watched Oppenheimer?
I sure have. Yeah.
Okay. So the Manhattan Project starts in Chicago. And with all the German physicists designing the project, when they got to operational stage, they had to produce enriched plutonium and tritium. Tritium is the trigger for a nuclear bomb. Okay. Plutonium is the fuel for a nuclear bomb. So they built 2 facilities, one in Savannah, Georgia, and one in Hanford, Washington. And that's where they built them. And because that's the final stage for making a nuclear weapon, that was ultimately where all the scientists ended up. They had moved them from Chicago then to Washington and Georgia to finish it up. And so a lot of the elements that you see on the table that are later named, like seaborgium, I got to meet and work with that guy. He was the last living man to have an element named after him because they changed the convention for how they name elements after that. But a cool group of people that were, they were all part of the Great Generation, and they were creative, and they worked a solution to stop what they saw was an unacceptable outcome, which was, of course, German dominance in Europe. And were it not for the people involved in the Manhattan Project, I don't know that we would have brought such a decisive end to the war. Obviously, Germany had already faltered by the time we perfected the nuclear weapon. But had those scientists not immigrated to the U.S. and sabotaged, while they were still in Germany, they sabotaged the development of nuclear weapons in Germany. Had they just gone along and facilitated the development, Germany would have had nuclear weapons, and that war probably would have turned out pretty good.
Yeah, very interesting. I got one more question along that whole storyline. So I remember in 2005, I was sitting in a real estate office, a national brand, and I had built a pretty large franchise, and I was in charge of recruiting, training, coaching, hiring, firing. And I literally felt the spigot turn off in October of 2005. Everything was rolling like crazy from like 02 to 05. Everything was hunky dory in real estate. And all of a sudden, I could literally feel it. It was like this sense in my bones that everything had stopped because, the market was just on fire. And then it happened like in October of 05. And then 06 was definitely the worst year I've ever had in my career in almost 25 years. It was brutal. And managing people's emotions was very hard. I was sitting at the closing table quite often with people that were in tears, people that never had any thought of ever short selling their house or losing their house to foreclosure. So my question is, Stuart, how do you manage the emotions of somebody that files for a bankruptcy? Because if it were me, I would feel horrible. I would start to feel like I'm inadequate. I'm a failure. How do you help them through that emotionally?
Well, let me clarify something, then I'll answer your question. I represent trustees and I represent banks.
Okay.
So,
the other side.
The way I do it is I try to treat them as humanly as possible while saying I have to take your house or I have to take your business. But from the other side, there's a lot of really good, competent attorneys. And I know it's hard to do mentally, but I would say if I was going to give advice to someone, it is a temporary roadblock, right? A lot of very successful business people have failed at business. In fact, I can't remember who recently gave the advice. I think it was Bezos. I can't recall. Someone said, you want to start a business as soon as possible and get that first failure out of your way because, and this is entirely true. I believe it in work. I believe it in life, right? How you learn is you fail at something, right? And you fail horribly and you see everything that you would have done differently. And then you do it again and you do it differently and you may fail a second time, right? It is not a one shot, we only get one shot in life kind of deal. Without going into like a ton of detail, because it's his story to tell, not mine. My uncle ran a heating and air conditioning business in Georgia for 25 years. Failed in 05. They've had to file bankruptcy, basically restarted, but came up with a new solution. He was a guy that micromanaged everything and ran everything through himself. When he rebooted it, and mind you, this is after 25, 30 years of running a heating and air conditioning business. The second time around, he decided he was going to start aggregating other business owners into his brand. And he collected electricians, plumbers, heating and air conditioning. Then he kept those owners on as managers. So they had less responsibility. They didn't have to worry about servicing the trucks, payroll. Payroll really is like the biggest problem of running a business, right? They didn't have to have any of those headaches. And he aggregated them into a massive company between Florida and Tennessee. And then he sold to a Canadian company for way more money than he ever made through those 20 years of grinding, being a micromanager, right? So he learned his lesson. And my point is, he's now multimillionaire many times over. He's got a yacht. He's got cool cars, Ferraris, Lambos, all that. And he did that at the age of 60, like within 2 years, right? And so I think that's the big lesson. It sucks to lose your house. It sucks to lose your car. People in part failed not because of themselves. They failed because the environment they were in got really thin. And for instance, in Phoenix, I'll speak about Phoenix specifically. In 05, 06, the market only supported, because transactions got so low, it only supported so many realtors. And Arizona has a lot of realtors, right? And so if there are only X amount of transactions, 1,000 transactions, logic says maximum only 1,000 realtors can be on the selling side, and only 1,000 realtors can be on the buying side. But in reality, it's probably more like 5 or 6 realtors that are dominating most of those transactions. And you saw the same thing in a bunch of industries. People stopped going to the dentist. People stopped going to a lot of what we consider probably most of the time necessary business transactions. But when you don't have a job, you're just buying food, you're paying for electricity, you might pay your cell bill, and that's it. And so you saw a lot of people that had never thought that their industry was impacted by the economy find out everybody's industry is impacted by the economy, and people that did nothing wrong to fail. They didn't change. They didn't change how they practiced medicine. They didn't change how they designed architectural plans. There was nothing wrong with what they were doing, but the economy ground to a halt. And so people had to file bankruptcy. And since we're talking about that, I think the biggest sin people made was, and you can't know the future, people kept putting money in to sustain their businesses, right? Their retirement funds, their home equity, whatever. They were drawing that down to keep their businesses alive. And that's what bled everybody out, right? People didn't start filing bankruptcy en masse until 2008. That was 3 years of being bled down. But you don't know the future. Had they stopped putting money into their businesses, shut their businesses down, started new businesses, filed Chapter 11 for their business, terminate all those leases they didn't need, whatever it is, terminate the employees, and start over, they probably wouldn't have had to put all their savings to keep that business alive. So that's a lesson I hope a lot of people learned is once you see quarter over quarter decline that is accelerating, not decelerating, you may want to start paring down faster and eliminate your obligations. Chapter 11 is good for businesses to terminate contracts. So if you have like a vendor contract and that vendor is costing you, you're losing money on that contract, you don't want to wait 2 years. You probably want to consider either renegotiating that contract with the vendor on the front end, saying, look, I'm going to have to file Chapter 11, but I don't want to. So let's renegotiate our contract. Or you have to consider perhaps ripping the Band-Aid off and filing Chapter 11, or shutting the business down and starting a new business.
See, all that's a good argument for being a good steward with your money proactively, right? Always looking at your budget. You know, hey, Chase, we've had some amazing people on this program, and it's funny. There's a commonality, right? Just about everybody has a story of tremendous loss, either personally or from a business standpoint. And these people we've had on they just get better and they learn from that. Instead of becoming a victim, they become the victor and they persevere, you know? And so, I mean, what does that say about the human condition? I mean, Chase, we've heard what do you think about all this? It's good stuff.
Yeah, I think, and you said it, right, Stuart? It's like sometimes it happens to a lot of people, the failure, it happens in order to succeed. It's like that quote was great, right? You get it out of the way and you move on to the next one. You learn what you need to do better next time. So that you're more prepared and you're ready for it. I mean, yeah, it fits a lot of the script that everybody on this podcast has been talking about. It's a great thing, and it's something too to just be aware of, right? Failure happens, and it's something that everybody comes up against at some point, right? Otherwise, you're not really trying a whole lot.
You're certainly not taking any risks. And in the bankruptcy world, this is known. Most people can succeed in a good economy, okay? Because you can be really inefficient and still make money. In a bad economy, you find out exactly where your inefficiencies are and where your leadership failures are. And that's when you got to pivot or make changes to lean up, to improve efficiency, change your model. But ultimately, that's what's going to turn you from a regional or local successful business into a national or international business. If you don't go through those bad times, you can't possibly figure that out. I think, and it's not just because I'm from Washington, but I don't think Amazon could have been what it was if it was not losing funds for its first 13 years. I think they had a negative balance sheet for the first 13 years, but their investors believed in them, but they had to stretch cash a long ways because they were not making money and they had really angry investors and they had to stretch it out. But ultimately they were able to sell their investors on that vision which was we're going to sell people's data, aggregate it and sell it. But they weren't wrong, right? That was the future. That was the future of online commerce. And I don't think you get there if you start your business and you instantly are making money hand over fist. Because why would you change your model? Why would you change the industry if you're making money that way? So we had a lot of really, I think a lot of industries changed in '08. I think real estate is one of the industries that changed the most. You certainly have national developers in commercial space and residential space that I don't think would be nearly as big as they are if '08 or if '05, '06, '07 hadn't happened.
Yeah, I coach agents around the country, and between 20 and 2023, you could be hit by a deal. If you could fog a mirror, you'd actually be doing some deals, right? So that's kind of like a little red dot when I look at like the statistics, right? That's kind of like, hey, yeah, that was a steroid year. And now you look at 2024, 2025. Now we're going to see how the weed is separating from the chaff. And you have to continually pivot, and you got to get back to the basics and master the basics. And you got to watch your budget like a hawk. So there's times in business where if you're not going backwards and if you're at least breaking even, you're winning. And I predict 2025 to be another difficult year for a lot of agents, because I know a lot of great agents, Stuart, out there that are a little freaked out right now. And I'm like, okay, let's go. Let's get back to the basics. We still have transactions. It might be 60 to 70% of the high, but this is actually more of a normal market. But the problem is affordability, right? That's the challenge. So we got to go out and just be better. We got to be better ourselves. We got to improve upon ourselves all the time and look inward right now, because it's a time of conviction and grit, for a lot of industries. So I knew when that thing was going up, I knew when the rates bottomed out, I could see the other side of it because I've been through it, and I'm proud of the fact that I've been through these cycles before. And it kind of gives me a little bit of a better optic when I can help people a little bit. So for what it's worth. Yeah.
No, that's a good point. And everyone should be cautious when things are too good, right? Because the rates being as low as they were meant people could afford more expensive properties. And of course that inflated the prices, but it's easy for prices to go up, but it's really hard for them to come down because people finance, they're stuck in at that purchase price. And so now we have, I would say, a lot of supply for sale. But unless you have a cash buyer, those are expensive properties. A property that was $300,000 5 years ago is $700,000 now, and rates now are higher. It was one thing at 3%, at 7, 8, 10. It's a lot more expensive, and so that's kind of the flip side, right? If we hadn't have had that really hot market, I think things would be probably a little bit better now because prices wouldn't have gone up so much. So it's always a good lesson to store those wins away for later, because easy wins early means hard wins later. So
for sure.
Isn't that the truth?
So Stuart, I know you kind of talked about you started out in family, right? And then you made your way to bankruptcy, or, eventually. And I guess what brought you there? Was it because all of these bankruptcies were happening? You guys were super busy with all of that. Is that what kind of drove you in there to the bankruptcy, or how did you find that specialty?
The very real honest answer was I did not like, criminal law that much. I did not like family law that much, except I did like all the trial work. Both criminal and family get you into trial all the time. So I did like that. So I knew I wanted to change areas of law. 07, 08, nobody was hiring except bankruptcy firms. Everyone else were letting go their associates because, of course, when you have to start trimming the fat, you don't start at the managing partner, senior partner level. You should, because that's the highest overhead, right? But you start at the associates because they're your most recent hires. And functionally speaking, associates don't have a client base, so they're not generating the work, right? So they're easier to let go because you can let them go and not lose any clients. And so there was nobody hiring except bankruptcy, and there were only On the side that I do, which is the trustee representation and representation of the lenders, there weren't that many firms that do it. So it was a real small niche market. I kind of lucked out. At the time, there were 3 firms representing Chapter 7 trustees. At the time, there were maybe 22 trustees in Arizona. 3 firms pretty much represented all of them. Now, there's 12. No, I'm sorry. There's 7 trustees in Phoenix, and there's 2 in the rest of the state, so 9 total. And my firm represents most of them. So it just was a real niche market, but it was the only one that was on fire at the time. Mergers and acquisitions was non-existent. People actually stopped getting divorced when the economy went down because you couldn't afford divorce, or they were doing it themselves. Even now, only 30% of family law participants have an attorney. Most 70% do it pro se without an attorney. Criminal went down, believe it or not because people stopped committing crimes, but because they couldn't afford an attorney. So a lot of people were taking state appointed attorneys rather than hiring an attorney. DUIs went down. People were going out less to drink because it was too expensive, so they were drinking at home. Things like that. But most industries suffered in law, except bankruptcy. And so it was more just, I got channeled there because that was the only place hiring. I knew nothing about it. I didn't take bankruptcy in law school. I knew a little bit about the Uniform Commercial Code. So I knew a little bit about the area of law that overlaps with bankruptcy, but I didn't know anything about it. But I was desperate for a job. And it's a fake it till you make it kind of situation. And I was fortunate that I interviewed well, got hired. And then it was like drinking from a fire hydrant. My first day, I had to go do a evidentiary hearing, a trial. And it was because at my firm, they had all been bankruptcy practitioners for pretty much their entire careers. They didn't do trials at all. So they had no trial experience. There was only one attorney there that had some trial experience. And because I had some trial experience, I was that guy they were just going to throw all of them at. My first day I went to trial, I got bushwhacked because my side hadn't done a lot of the stuff they were supposed to do. So I got whooped that first day. I like to say this is my only loss, but I did lose. And I went out, the other side, I think they kind of felt bad for me, both the client and the attorney. So we all went out for lunch afterwards, and had a good time. My bar, the bankruptcy bar, is very collegial. It's a small bar. So everybody knows each other. We have like 7 judges in Arizona, 5 in Phoenix, 2 in the rest of the state. And so you see all the same people again and again and again. So you really can't be too difficult because although you might be across the aisle from someone today, tomorrow you may need a favor from that person in a case. And so you represent your interests, you do it zealously, but you're not a jerk about it because you don't want to salt the earth and then tomorrow have to ask that attorney to convince their client to cut you a favor so that you can get a deal done. So yeah, you play nice. And that's how I got there.
That's a great point. And there was a lot of good stuff there. But the just playing nice, right? I feel like that relates a lot to the realtors too, huh, Jeff? Because it's like, you never know when you're going to see them again, right? You might be doing another cross sale with somebody, or, you never know when you're going to run into them. So it's like, hey, building relationships with other people. You're going to see them again, trying to play nice in the sandbox.
Yeah, there's like 50,000 plus real estate agents in Arizona last time I checked. But it's funny, it's also a small industry, so you end up doing deals with people down the road. By the way, I didn't know there were so many DIY divorces. That's interesting.
The judiciary, I talked to a lot of the family law judges because I represent special real estate commissioners who are court appointed parties. When a divorced couple can't agree on how to dispose of a property, they appoint a realtor to sell that property. They're not the easiest transactions in the world. Usually at least one of those parties is non-cooperative, which is why the court has appointed somebody. So I have to interact with the judges a lot in the family law sector. And they would love if every litigant in family law had an attorney, because it is cumbersome and onerous for somebody to navigate the legal process without an attorney. And you end up with fights over things that probably could have been avoided if they had an attorney counseling them. And I feel bad for every litigant I see that's in there representing themselves, because that is a really difficult thing to do. People go to school for 7 years. They practice for, I'm going to say, a decade before you really know what you're doing, even a little bit. And that's a lot of education, right? That's 17, 20 years between school and practicing just to kind of know what you're doing. And for someone to just step up one day and do it themselves, that's something.
Do you see that a lot, Stuart? Like, let's say we take a listing. Let's say Chase and I take a listing, and the sellers cannot agree on the disposition of the property. So they lawyer up, they call you, and you go in and you start trying to do depositions or whatever you guys do. Do you often see the other side not represented? Is that common?
So just so you know, so usually what happens is the divorce gets filed. Sometimes they're trying to sell the house beforehand, but the divorce gets filed. And the court says, okay, wife, you want to stay on the property, but you guys co-own this. You're co-obligated on the debt. You have to refinance husband off in like 6 months. And if you don't do it, the property's got to get sold. And usually they'll give them a chance to cooperate and hire a realtor and sell it themselves. But wife wants to stay on the property even though she can't afford it, right? So she'll not cooperate with viewings of the property. She'll refuse to sign documents timely. So they lose buyer after buyer after buyer. So the court says, enough of these games. I'm appointing somebody that's going to be a realtor on behalf of the court. And I'm going to empower them to sign contracts. I'm going to empower them to come back to court and sanction you and remove you from the property if you don't cooperate. But this property is getting sold. And that's when I come into it. Usually what happens is a special real estate commissioner has been appointed. They send out the listing agreement and they say, we want to look at the property so we can do a market analysis and come up with a listing price. And the locks turn on the property. They glue shut the little mail slot on the front door, and they stop answering their cell phones and their email. And then the special real estate commissioner hires me, and we file a motion to get before the court. And the court, because the divorce case, has jurisdiction over that property. And if the court wants it sold so that the other spouse is not tethered to them forever, where they have to worry about them making payments on the mortgage and it affecting their credit, then we get appointed. If the party doesn't cooperate, there's not a whole lot of discovery, because either they cooperate or they don't. And so we file what's called an application for order to show cause for why you're not cooperating with the court's order to allow the special real estate commissioner to list and sell the property. Sometimes they show up, sometimes they don't. I would say they're not represented. Yes. I mean, the statistic is 70% overall. I think that's accurate. So a lot of times they show up and want to present evidence at an evidentiary hearing, and they don't know, other than having watched Law and Order. And they will do their best. Unfortunately, it's very difficult if you're not a lawyer to navigate that process. And a lot of times by this point, there's nothing to say other than, I have to cooperate, so I'm going to cooperate. And they're not saying that. And so they lose. Usually they end up having to pay my client's attorney's fees for hiring me. They usually end up having an additional 1% commission that's going to come out of their chunk of the money. So, my realtor client will get 6% plus 1 for that sanction. And then usually I get an order that allows me to enlist the sheriff's department to go physically remove the person from the property if they don't leave within, say, 72 hours. And then we put their personal property into storage, prepaid for a month or two. And then if they don't go claim it, they got to deal with the storage facility for that. It's not ideal, way to interact with people. But the reality of the situation is, the only reason we're here is because one of the parties wants to keep the property usually, but they can't afford the property. And their now divorced spouse should not be intertwined with them for the rest of their life because they made the mistake of buying a property together. And that's not fair.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
So this is the only way to separate it.
Man, this is fascinating. Let's go back to the BKs for a second, if you don't mind. Do you see more or less BKs in the next 5 years?
So I will answer that. The last year, we are up 20%. Consumer bankruptcy, which is, people filing bankruptcy. I think we're up more, business bankruptcy. A lot of loans have come, due. They've matured, and credit's harder to get now for businesses. The rates are much higher. Most business loans also have variable rates. They're not locked in. So when the rate goes up from 3 or 4% to 7% or 8%, sometimes that can eat up their whole profit margin, and then the business is in trouble and they can't refi. So I think they're going to continue to go up. There's a few canary in the coal mine indicators. Defaults are way up on retail loans for cars. Mortgages defaults are way up. You see some interesting but correlated market trends. When you see people going less to salons, so you see hair and nail salons going out of bankruptcy or filing bankruptcy or going out of business, but you see like Revlon sales going up because people are buying nail polish in the stores because they're doing their own nails, right? These are trends that you see that are occurring. They're leading indicators. You see reports of average savings are down. And obviously, we've had a lot of inflationary pressure the last 3 to 4 years. When you see savings go down from 10% to 2%, that means people are living paycheck to paycheck. And so that means every time somebody loses a job unexpectedly, they are a month away from having to file bankruptcy. It also means they have less discretionary funds. So for your retail contractors, they're gonna take a hit because consumer confidence is lower. So yes, I see bankruptcies going up. There's things that could change it. If you saw a massive reduction in interest rates because inflationary pressures eased, that could stimulate investment. And that could free up capital for businesses to hire more employees, which would increase, of course, consumer spending abilities. But that's not the way things are trending. And so I don't have a crystal ball for 5 years down the road. I would say next year, we would probably expect bankruptcies to continue. Other than that, you also see other restructuring. So receiverships, you see these things called assignment for the benefit of creditors. And these are ways to avoid bankruptcy, but same net effect. A secured creditor is pretty much taking all their collateral with the business and maybe selling it to a new investor to run that business, or maybe selling it back to the original investor. But all the other creditors of that business aren't getting paid. And it's a waterfall effect. Every time someone doesn't pay their bills, that party isn't able to pay their bills. That party then has to lay some people off because they have less money coming in the door.
Outstanding. A follow-up on that. So, Chase and I have been talking to a lot of sellers lately, and we run into more and more now that bought during the low rate time period. And, since the downturn in the market, a lot of them are underwater, right? So do you have, for the benefit of our audience, I've done many REOs and many short sales, but from an attorney standpoint, could you give like kind of a description of what a short sale is and what a foreclosure is in the context of real estate for our listeners to understand?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Well, a short sale is when you have liens that are greater than the value of the property. So let's say you have a $400,000 house. Unfortunately, when you bought it, it was a $600,000 house. You finance most of it, so you might have $550,000 in loans against that property, a mortgage that is secured by that property. You might have some real property taxes that are owed. And maybe if you were the stereotype of 05, 06, maybe you took out a HELOC, that is a home equity line of credit. And when you had some equity in that house, you drew that down at a higher rate than your mortgage. And all those liens add up to, say, maybe you owe $600,000 or $700,000 on a $400,000 house. So then the question becomes, how can you possibly sell it? Because you need to pay off those liens in order, through a traditional sale, to be able to sell it to a third party. They don't want to buy that house with a bunch of liens on it. They want it free and clear of those liens. Well, banks oftentimes are rational actors, and they know that if a property is worth less than what they're owed on it, they're in trouble. In Arizona, we are what's called an anti-deficiency state. That means if you just stop paying your mortgage on your residence, your single family residence that you have, the bank can't sue you for the difference between what the house is worth and what they're owed. That gives banks a lot of incentive to do a deal with you. That anti-deficiency statute does not apply to HELOCs, so always be careful when you're taking out a home equity line of credit, that whether it's your homestead or single family residence or not, they can still sue you if you don't pay them in full. But banks who give HELOCs do know that if you're not paying your mortgage and you're losing your house, you're probably also not far away from filing bankruptcy, which means they might get that 0 cents on the dollar return that nobody wants. So, and this is akin to, I would say for a realtor, this is akin to like a quadruple bypass surgery, okay? Because they have to get the first position lender to agree on the valuation of the property. They usually will have to throw some money at the second, if there's a second, especially if that second's held by a different bank. So if your first is held with, say, Chase, and your second is held with Wells Fargo with that second is going to want some money. You have a better chance if your HELOC is with the same party that owns your first position mortgage, that they might be willing to just consider it all as one bundle of debt. Because ultimately, whether it goes through different branches or not, it's all JP Morgan Chase, right? So you would say, look, here's an appraisal. My property is worth $400,000. I have an offer from somebody for $400,000, and I want to submit this for a short sale. Normally, for a bank to consider a short sale, you have to be several months in arrearage, meaning not having paid your mortgage. That's a big commitment. You have to decide early on, because you're going to ruin your credit some, right? And it's not possible to get a short sale with most banks unless you're at least 2 to 3 months behind. Okay. So you pre-commit that this is what I want. I want to sell this property. And so you stop paying your mortgage. Then you let the mortgage company know, we want to sell this property. It's worth $400,000. Here's an appraisal that we got within the last 120 days. It's current. Here's an offer. You can take the net amount, which for the purposes of this example, we'll say is like $365, but we're also going to give $10,000 to the second. We're going to pay our realtor. We're going to pay the closing costs to the title company. And I would really like it if you let me go for the balance of that loan. And HELOC, I would really like it if you let me go for the balance of that loan, which is the real reason to do a short sale. You want that second to let you go. The first can't come after you, but that second can. And so they have to weigh, is taking $10,000 now worth it to let you go, knowing it's very likely if this house goes to foreclosure, you're going to file bankruptcy. And so you have to go through their approval departments at the banks. That is, like I said, it's a lot like a quadruple bypass surgery. A lot of things have to go right. You need a realtor who's dogmatic and who is going to follow up continuously. You need probably a lender for the buyer who understands the process, unless they're paying cash, and a title company who understands the process. And everyone has to constantly harass the banks to make sure they follow up. I'm making it sound difficult because it is, but they do happen. because what a bank does not want to do, their worst case scenario is they have to hire an attorney, foreclose on a property, and then take possession of that property. The banks large in part are not in the property management business. They do not want to own 50,000 houses across this country, right? In normal times, they can handle owning a few properties, but they don't want to own a bunch, because what happens is they get vandalized, all sorts of things happen, squatters move in, but that's not what banks want to do. So they have a strong incentive to do a short sale. They just have, I think, smaller departments. And when things really start to happen, it's a lot for them. And so you just have to be patient. So you need a patient buyer, a patient title company, and I think it can happen. If you're willing to go through the public colonoscopy of constantly providing your financials to the bank, the second, sending updated financials in a month, sending updated financials in another month. And sometimes short sales can take 6, 9, 12 months. The upside is when you're going through this process, you're probably not paying your mortgage, right? And so you continue to live in that house, and sometimes the process can take a while. And so that's the process. The bank might say no, and then they might foreclose on the property. But I can say, as a guy that represents banks, that's not their preference. That's not what they want. Despite what the public may think, the banks do not want to take your house from you. That is a pain. If they take the house, they usually will have to create a special purchase entity, or special purpose entity to put that house into. They then have to hire a property management company. They then have to invest money to, assuming damage was done to that property before it was foreclosed on, they then have to fix up the property. They then have to market and sell the property. And that means they might have to carry that on their books for 6 months, a year, more. They don't want to do that. So they have a lot of motivation to cooperate with a short sale, but it isn't what they do. And so everyone has to be patient, that you're forcing somebody to do something that they're not really built to do. What they're built to do is lend you money and then collect monthly payments. That's what banks want to be in the business of. They don't want to be in the business of foreclosing. So I think you got a good shot at short sales if you have a good appraiser, if you have a team that knows what they're doing. That is the thing. You don't want to be, as a seller, you don't want to hire a realtor that's never done a short sale. You probably want someone that's done it a few times. For realtors that are wanting to get into that because it's the only game in town, or it's becoming the only game in town, you would probably want to associate with a realtor who went through this back in 08, 09, 2010, and lean on them, because they're going to have resources to help get this done. And a lot of it really is just calling constantly to the bank to see where in the process it is. But that's a skill, and that's a skill that some people acquired in the last downturn.
Yeah. And with that, what does the interaction look like between, let's say, yourself as the attorney and the realtor in that regard? Obviously, they're hammering the phones trying to get a hold of the bank to figure out where we're at in the process. But is there any direct interaction with the attorney as a realtor?
So in commercial, yes, most likely. The bank's probably going to utilize counsel. And they're probably, if it's a short sale, if it's a workout, they're definitely going to utilize counsel. But it's going to be more on a contract drafting basis to make sure that the whatever the workout is, they're covered in the contract. If it's not a workout, if it's a commercial foreclosure, they're 100% hiring a realtor. They may appoint a receiver so that they never have to take that commercial property onto their books. Commercial properties come with a host of issues that residential doesn't, namely environmental. And I'm sure you guys know, but I'll explain for your listeners. With environmental issues, everyone in the chain of title of that property has an obligation to clean up that property. And so it is a hot potato that you do not want to catch. The way that banks get around taking possession of those properties is they will appoint a court-appointed receiver, which is always a relief under the mortgage. If you read your mortgage, whether it's residential or commercial, they list the remedies that banks have. And one of them is appointing a receiver. So whether you know it or not, if you have a mortgage, you've already agreed that you agree to the appointment of a receiver in the event that you miss a mortgage payment. Okay. And what a receiver does is they come in and they stand in your shoes as the homeowner, but title doesn't change. Okay. So that receiver then will maybe kick you out of the property, maybe put property management in, maybe fix up the property. Then they hire a realtor and they sell that property, and that property never went into the name of the bank. So they avoid all that issues with environmental concerns, right? But a bank foreclosing on a property, if they choose to foreclose on the property and take it into their name, what they'll probably do is assign that loan to an LLC they create just for the purpose of foreclosing on that loan. They will have an environmental analysis done of the property, phase 1, phase 2, make sure there's no contamination. And obviously, I've had a lot of experiences with things like gas stations, medical offices, and these are potential toxic zones because you have radioactive material at a doctor's office with x-ray machines. You have oil, gas, antifreeze if it's a gas station, that kind of thing. You see it less often with residential. Banks aren't quite so scared about residential. It's unlikely people are storing medical waste in their backyard. Possible, but unlikely. So banks are more willing to foreclose on a house and carry it, usually, again, in a special purpose entity they built just for foreclosing on houses. With residential, it might have 1,000 different loans in that portfolio rather than just one. Commercial, it's usually one entity per property. Residential, it may be a bunch, but they're more willing to do it. But I guess that's when you get an attorney involved. When you're talking with a short sale in residential, they're not going to involve an attorney because they have in-house workout people that know the process and can talk you through it. With commercial, they're probably going to engage counsel because and I say this as a lawyer, every commercial transaction should have a lawyer involved. Realtors do a great job. In residential, it's easier because there's a standard form, and you don't have to lawyer. In a commercial transaction, I would be worried as a realtor doing a commercial transaction where there wasn't an attorney involved, just because you end up with a lot of non-standard provisions and you can wade into trouble that way. Usually a buyer has an attorney in a commercial transaction, unless it's a real small commercial transaction. And even for small ones, I would say you should spend $1,000 to have a transactional attorney look over your contract, make sure you didn't miss something, make sure there's no easements on that property that you missed, because your average person's not an expert at reading a title report, which lists all the interest in the property, which could be loans, it could be an easement, it could be a reservation of rights for somebody. And a realtor can point out and say, hey, did you know that you can't build in the center of that lot because there is an easement running through it? And therefore, that hotel you wanted to build here, you can't. You can only build 2 small structures on either side of that easement, right? You want an attorney looking at that to tell you for 2 reasons. 1, they'll catch it and they'll tell you. 2, if they don't catch it, I guess you have somebody to sue for not telling you. Whereas I don't know. I mean, as a realtor, I wouldn't want to be on the hook for it, whether the realtor had an obligation to tell. There's a much fuzzier line over what duties a realtor holds to a client than an attorney, because you guys aren't attorneys. And so there's a gray area between what is lawyer work and what is realtor work. And in commercial, if I'm a realtor, I probably want an attorney involved. So there's no gray area. That's all attorney work. I just do my marketing, and I don't have to draft the contracts for you.
This has been a fascinating hour, I got to tell you. In fact, I'm going to be using this video, Stuart, to give to agents in my organization that have questions, because we're getting a lot of questions around these things right now. So thank you for this. This has been amazing. And so you've been listening to Stuart Rodgers, and he's the managing partner at Knock, Rodgers, Hilkert, and Santilli. And before we say goodbye, Stuart, how can people get a hold of you, and what area are you in the Valley?
Sure. Thank you. I'm in Central Phoenix. We might be relocating, but only like a mile. Right now I'm at 20th Street in Campbell, which is just south of Camelback. So not far from the Biltmore, if that gives people a reference point. They can call me at 602-258-6000, or they can email me at, it's my name, Stuart, Stuart, period, Rodgers, Rodgers, at nrhslaw.com.
Thank you, Stuart. What a great day. And Chase, we have something to celebrate. We just had our 8,500th view for this show. It's exciting. And this has only been around for like 3 months. And I just believe that if we keep bringing on people like Stuart that are so good at what they're doing in their niche, we're going to keep on driving that subscribership. And please know, friends, that, I've been in the business 25 years. Chase has been in leadership in construction and real estate for 10 years. So we got 35 years. I've been through every market. I've sold over 1,000 houses. I've owned brokerages. I'm a broker myself. We will get the job done for you. And then Chase is my business partner. Nobody's going to outwork that guy. He wakes up and he's the most positive person I know. So together we are a very, very strong team, and we will not let you down. So if you need anything in Arizona, please count on us. You can call us. Chase, what's your number, man? Throw out your number.
707-685-7214.
Awesome. We do relocations all the time. Everybody's moving here still. By the way, the economy in Arizona, I'm still pretty bullish about it. A lot of good things happening. So give us a shout and let us help you out. Stuart, thanks again, my friend. This has been great getting to know you better, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Chase. It was great. And I really appreciate it. And I'll talk less next time. So
No, it was great. Thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you, guys.